Joining us right now on the Daily Dose, we have someone who I am really looking forward to speaking with because we have the author of a powerful new book called Out of Bounds. Now, he is drawing from real events, but our guest kind of pulls back the curtain on the complex, at times volatile world of youth sports. His book tells the story of a respected coach whose career is derailed by baseless allegations and this is key, unchecked parental ambition. Darren Ault is joining us today. He explores how toxic dynamics between parents, players, school boards, coaches, all of the above can shatter lives and shatter reputations. Out of Bounds is more than just a sports story. It is a cautionary tale. Darren, I want to welcome you to the Daily Dose. I appreciate you being here.
Thank you, Clint. I'm so happy to be here and appreciate the opportunity to share my story with you and your listeners.
Well, Darren, first off, I want to talk about the book. I want to talk about some of these things, but what is your background? Where did you grow up?
I grew up in Northern California.
Okay.
I currently live in New Jersey, and
Okay.
yes, it was a New Jersey girl that won me over and brought me here.
Of course, of course.
But I went east to go to the Naval Academy for college, and basically didn't go back to California from that point for anything longer than a couple months. So my wife likes to say I've been here longer than I was there. So I'm officially a New Jerseyan.
Okay, you're officially an East Coast guy now. That has all changed. You've gone from west to east.
Yep.
As a kid, as a young kid, maybe elementary school, middle school, high school, what sports did you play? What was kind of your background?
Sure. I played a lot. I unfortunately never developed enough time or devoted enough time to develop the strongest skill sets, but basketball was my main game. Partly because I was one of the bigger kids, and I'm 6'6" now. I think in 8th grade I was 5'10" or something like that, and that naturally kind of put me on the basketball court. Unfortunately, back in the day, it also put me in the 5 spot, which coaches back then just kind of put you in one spot.
Oh yeah,
limited you. But I also ran cross country in high school. I played some football. I played golf a little bit, which that was more just to get a couple free weeks of golf, to be honest with you. But
sure.
The 2 sports I really drove to were cross country, because I did originally get in shape for basketball. And what I learned shortly thereafter is that they're 2 entirely different types of running. But I fell in love with the discipline and the drive and the me against me in cross country, but there was still a team element to it. And then basketball was my main sport.
Okay. Now I've got to ask you, because you're West Coast, you went East Coast, you've gone clear across the country. As a kid, do you remember the teams or the athletes that you grew up kind of rooting for? Who were you watching? Who are you rooting for?
From a professional standpoint?
Yeah, any of the above. College, professional, what were you watching?
Yeah, I was watching professional more so than college when I was younger. It wasn't until I went to college that I started to pick up on the collegiate athletics. But I very clearly remember rooting for the Los Angeles Lakers, the Dallas Cowboys, and the Cincinnati Reds. And I dare you to figure that out, being that I was from California.
Well, I'm going to go ahead and assume that was all in that era of really, really quality teams from all 3 of those. So I can understand that a little bit. I've got to ask you this, because we're going to get into this in just a minute. We're going to talk about the dynamic between parents, players, that kind of thing. As an athlete who played, at least the high school level, whatever, what were your parents like in the stands?
Interestingly enough, my parents, my mom raised basically my brother and sister and I by herself. By the time I got of age to be in athletics, she did what she could to be there.
Yeah.
But especially on a cross country course, if I saw her at the end. So that's the beauty of running cross country. In basketball, if I saw her come into the gym. I never heard from her during the game. I saw her after the game, and it was really more, very positive, great game. Even if we got drubbed or I didn't play particularly well, but always very positive and uplifting.
Well, and that's interesting to me, because I had a mom who was very, very similar. I had a dad who was a little more vocal, yet my dad was always that positive vocal, that positive, hey, go do this, go do that. It wasn't the negativity that we're really starting to see more and more and more. We're going to get into that in a minute. Yeah. But I've always found that kids that were raised that way are that way in turn. And I think we now have the product of a lot of kids who weren't raised that way. And as a result, it's gotten worse and worse and worse. I don't think it's a coincidence. Okay.
Yeah, I definitely think it's a dynamic that starts at home, but there are other attributes to it as well.
No, there are. And you can walk into a gym and you can feel sometimes this is going to get ugly. This is going to be very, very uncomfortable place. So you get done with high school. What do you end up doing after high school? Where did you go?
So, on sight unseen, I applied to the United States Naval Academy. I was honored to be able to be nominated by both President Reagan and our local congressman, and I actually got in on the local congressman's, nomination. So I got on a plane, sight unseen, and flew across country at 17 years old, and began my attendance and my enrollment at the Naval Academy in Annapolis, Maryland.
What? And I'm not trying to age you. What kind of year are we talking about? When were you at the Naval Academy?
1984 to 1988, and don't worry about it, Clint. I'm very proud of it.
So then that brings me to, you were there when Navy was actually going to the national tournament. You were actually there for probably some of the best basketball years in Navy history.
I was there for prime time, not only for Navy basketball, certainly with David Robinson and the group that did make it to the Elite Eight my sophomore year. We lost to Duke.
I remember that. I hate to interrupt you, but one of the greatest cheers and chants I have ever heard was in that game. Yeah. Johnny Dawkins came down and dunked against Navy, and the Duke kids chanted "abandon ship," and I was like, "No, that's clever. That well done." I'm rooting for Navy in this, but well done. Okay, continue. I'm sorry.
I was actually at that game. I didn't find it very funny.
I'm sure you didn't. Yeah. I'm sure you didn't.
Yeah. But during that time, we also had the fortune of having Napoleon McCallum on the Navy football team, and he was a Heisman candidate for 2 years back to back. But phenomenal sports. And David Robinson and the team just absolutely changed the dynamic of the Naval Academy in sports and attending sports. And he was selling out our Halsey Fieldhouse, and everywhere he went was just an amazing draw and a really wonderful person.
Well, and that's what I was going to say. Not only did you get a great example on the court, you got a great example of a person off the court. The way he carries himself now, and I'll be honest, you see him every once in a while at a big game or whatever. You're like, I don't know. I think dude might still be able to play a little bit. He looks that good. Okay, so you go to the Naval Academy. You spend that time in the Navy. Are you involved in athletics at any point, or what's going on? Because you end up going down this path where right now, you're talking about athletics. What were you doing in the Navy Academy or after?
Yeah, so at the Naval Academy, you are required to do something, whether it's varsity athletics or intramural athletics or some kind of club. I was with the Navy team briefly my plebe year, made the JV squad, ended up breaking my shooting hand for some stupid incident. And then academics kind of took over, which, I wasn't there for basketball. I didn't get recruited for basketball. I was trying to walk on when I'm a 6'6" who weighs 185 pounds, and the guy who's at the 4 position is 6'9", 265, and I was struggling academically. I had to make the choice, and the choice was pretty easy at that point. But I did go on to play intramurals, basketball, football, softball. My last couple of years at intramurals in basketball, I started to kind of become the player manager of our intramural team. And I started to get a sense of, hey, I kind of like this.
Yeah.
And then one of my first duties coming out of the academy was at the Naval Academy Prep School in Newport, Rhode Island. And while there, I realized that they had a college prep basketball team, which was a feeder team to the Naval Academy, to the Coast Guard Academy, and to the Merchant Marine Academy. So we had recruits for those programs on this team, and we were playing teams like Brown JV and MIT and Harvard and Army Prep and some of the big prep schools like Maine Central Institute and New Hampton Prep. And I asked if I could be the assistant coach. And it was at that point that I got the bug. I loved it. It was amazing.
Well, and it is so addictive, and there are so many aspects to it. But to me, and I've talked with friends that I coached with, whatever, that seeing a light bulb go on with that kid, there's something really special about that. Having those kids later come back to you and say what they learned from you, seeing that progress down the road was just so addicting. I could easily see how you got bit by that, because I was bit by it as well. And it is something that is just, it's magic, and you can't describe it unless you've been there. But when
Yeah.
you see a kid get it, and you see a kid go on to bigger and better things, it's pretty special.
Yeah,
Having said that,
I refer to light bulb moments, just like you said in my book, often. But that was one of the greatest rewards as a coach, was being
yep,
able to see that. Oh, I get it. I get
yes,
what you're
yes.
telling me. And yeah, the relationships are unbelievable.
No, it's truly special, and like I said, if you haven't done it, you might, it might kind of sound crazy to you, but you're like, once you see it, you go, oh wow, this is what I want to do.
Yeah.
This is it's so important. And it, how many times do we see? I hate to say this, but if you look back, many times you can say how many great teachers did you have? What a few. How many bad teachers did you have? Name a ton of them. Same thing with coaches. How many coaches did you have that really touched your life, that really made a difference in your life? And a lot of times, unfortunately, especially right now, it doesn't seem like there's as many. There used to be, but it doesn't seem like there's as many. Having said that, who is the coach that got that light bulb on with you? Because I guarantee there was one. We all have one.
Yeah. No, there was definitely one in I had sixth, no, or seventh and eighth grade basketball.
Okay.
I had a coach for each year at that level, and we had two phenomenal teams. I was living in Arcata, California at the time, and went to Pacific Union Elementary, which, by the way, if you make the initials, it's PU. That's what we went by, which I was like,
Awesome.
that's a bad one.
That's great.
But Mr. Sly was my sixth grade math teacher and also the basketball coach. Just a really cool dude. He still had the Elvis sideburns, and
Oh,
he used to put us in. I forget the name of the car, but it was a big old Suburban, that he would pack us in and drive us from game to game. And we ended up having a great year. And then my eighth grade year was also my math teacher, Mr. Pontoni, who he was just a classy guy, just a gentleman, and he was calm under duress. He was fair to the players. He was, one of those guys who dug in and tried to coach even the people who didn't have the demonstration of skill or I got the game yet, to help them get there. And we ended up going undefeated that year, 21-0. And I
wow.
just, in my head, I can still hear Queen, "We Are the Champion" playing. So it was awesome. Those two guys definitely had an early impression.
Yeah.
And then when I started coaching at the Naval Academy Prep School, my head coach, Tom Marriott, who went on to coach, assistant coach at Navy men, and then he was the head coach at Navy women's for a few years.
Okay.
But he was another guy who had an indelible impression on me.
Well, and I always go back, most coaches do usually have that. Either
Yeah.
they had a coach that worked and they're like, I got to figure this out for myself. But I kind of wonder
Yeah.
if you had that. Okay. We've got to dig into this because Darren, you wrote this book, Out of Bounds.
Mhm.
What inspired this? And since you do have a background in coaching, I can only imagine, but did you have something specific that really inspired, kind of got the wheels turning here?
So there were several incidences over a period of time where it just dawned on me that why are these happening? Like, it just seems like parents are getting more unsettled, more aggressive, more in your face, crossing that player coach relationship line for little things, for silly things,
Yes.
and a lot of it was questioning, my judgment as a coach. So why isn't my daughter starting, or why isn't my daughter getting these X amount of minutes? And I'm like, well, you don't get the opportunity to see them practice, and it got to a point a couple of times where I would invite a father or a parent, come watch them for 2 hours like I do.
Yes.
And I actually had one father do that and then leave the gym partway through, and I never heard from him again. But and it's not that his daughter was bad; she was one of my better players. It's just parents have a tendency to look at their kids through rose-colored glasses.
Yes.
And so there was a period of time where I was the head coach at Modern Day High School, where I did these events just kept happening, and it wasn't that it's every parent. As a matter of fact, it was, I could count over my 33 years of coaching on less than two hands the
Right.
number of parents where these were problems. But the problems themselves were becoming more intense and more public and more visceral in the way they would talk to me or talk to a somebody else's daughter on the team, or their own kid in the parking lot or after the game. So at that point, I just started thinking and kind of jotting down a little bit of an outline. And in a conversation I had with the father who came to that practice, he and I actually coached together in AAU at one point.
Oh, wow.
And he called me all upset because he felt like I gave the role of point guard to a transfer who came in over his daughter. And we started to have a friendly conversation because we were friends. But at one point, he just started to really dig in and get a little upset. And I said to him, you're out of bounds on this. And I was like, wow, that's a pretty good title. you know?
No, it is.
Yeah.
That's a great title. As you look at this, and there are people that may be listening, and they say, "Well, I get, there's tension between parents, there's and coaches,
Mhm.
uh, parents and refs, parents sometimes even as an opponent. I mean, there are times I've heard parents say horrible things to opponents, but
Yeah.
in your book, you explore it in a really deep way. You really
Yeah.
dig down on how this all goes. How did you how did you come up with this and balance all this? Or was it just, hey, I can deal with the exact experience that I had to deal with?
Yeah, what I wanted to do, I mean, there was an event that the accusation of inappropriate touching that ended up getting me suspended my last year as a coach at Homedale High School and ultimately ended my coaching career.
Okay.
Um, and it was completely false, completely baseless. And I had the support of the entire basketball community and all of the parents, with the exception of one at that school. But that kind of became the straw that broke the camel's back. At that point, I said, you know what? And I actually had a very well-known coach who happens to be an athletic director who has over 700 wins in high school girls basketball in New Jersey, which is pretty significant,
Yeah.
significant in any program.
Sure.
But he said to me at one point, if they can do this to you, they can do this to anybody. And I took that measure of recognition that, hey, I took that as, hey, I'm a solid guy, I'm an honorable person, yet the school or the parents or whatever is willing to just push me aside for something that was not true. Why is that? Why is that fair? How does that happen? And I wanted to share that out so that we could start to look at some of the darker side of youth sports and maybe understand why. Why is it getting to be that point, and what can we do about it? So that people, most coaches, I would say 99% of coaches are trying to help develop a young mind, a
Sure.
young body to prepare them not just for the game, not just for a game, not just for the understanding of the game, but to help develop characteristics that are going to help them in life, whether it just relationships or work, ultimately when they get out into the work field. And I thought there was a message there that I felt compelled to share through my
Well,
stories.
sure. Well, and you've got a perfect example. And as unfortunate as it is, the accusation that you get,
Hmm.
the verdict at that point is irrelevant. As horrible as that is, we've reached a point in society now, the verdict doesn't matter. The
Hmm.
guilt or innocence makes no difference. No, you're guilty by just being named in it, and that is way too much power for some of these parents, some of these sometimes kids to
Yeah.
have, because it is completely and entirely unfair to the people, like you said, that truly care about their well-being, that are trying to do the right thing. And I
Yeah.
do think most of them are trying to do the right thing. Speaking of the kids, because I always say this on the dose, it's all about the kids, right? Like when we're talking about youth athletics, we're talking about college athletics. It's all about the kids, right?
Yep.
Of course it is. What are your thoughts about the pressures we're putting on kids? And when it was our era, and hey, you're getting to be a senior. Hey, these are fifth and sixth graders now getting this kind of pressure.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts about that kind of pressure?
We are definitely overloading young minds, young bodies, young spirits with way too much stuff.
Yep.
And I've done some personal training with some of my kids in the past. One AAU player who's just had phenomenal work ethic. You is one of those blue collar kids, lunch bucket kids, I call them, that you just adored as a coach. I would take 10 of them over 5 superstars any day.
Sure.
And I'm doing a personal training with her, and I can tell she's exhausted. And it's like 11 to 12 on a Saturday. And I could just tell she's wiped out. And I stopped her through after one drill. And I said, where have you been before this? Oh, I was with my shooting coach here and this coach here. And so I was her third coach in the same day before noon. And I stopped. I said, okay, we're done for the day. And she's like, why, coach? I can go. I said, it's not a question of your spirit, your will. I appreciate that. But you're burning out. You got too much going on.
Yeah.
And her parents are wonderful people, not problem parents whatsoever. But what they're responding to is a sense of pressure around having to be the best, right? Number one, to be the best in a sport where they're trying to win a scholarship to college. That was the early driver. Like, I need to get a scholarship to college. I need my kid to pay for themselves. And on top of that, I'm paying all this money for personal trainers. So I need a return on my investment. You know, if I'm paying $300-400 a month just to teach this kid how to be a better shooter or a better defender or whatever they're learning, and they're not seeing that translate to the games, there's a level of frustration that starts to bubble up around that, because they're not getting the bang for their buck. And then there's just an unrealistic expectation. I think if I saw a stat the other day where there's something like 554,000 kids who want a college scholarship that play high school athletics that are trying to move into college. And that percentage for basketball is 3.6%.
Yeah.
And to go on to be a pro, you're at 1 point something percent. And on the women's side, to be a pro, it's even less. It's less than 1%. So what are we doing to these kids to put this kind of pressure on them that they have to have this level of success in a sport, which quite honestly, some of them don't even have the passion for. They're doing it to soothe mommy and daddy.
Yeah. Well, and I got to let this sit for a second, because you just brought up so many points that we have been saying for years, and they're absolutely accurate. The scary part about so many of these things is we look at it and we say, hey, well, this kid made it, and that's wonderful. This kid, now, having said that, you would have a better chance of going and buying that kid a lottery ticket and saying, well, if they win, then I'll praise them. If they don't, whatever. But how many kids don't, quote unquote, make it? And then what are they left with? Because now this kid has to go through going, my mom and dad invested this, they invested this, I didn't make it. That cannot be how we're judging these kids. No. That cannot be what we're doing. And yet that's literally what we're doing.
It's literally what we're doing. And it's really hard as a coach in today's day and age to break down some of that shell around them of, you know, when I was an assistant coach for one of the powerhouse teams in New Jersey, St. John Vianney, they're a perennial powerhouse, nationally ranked often. I took the job as an assistant coach, and I was like, this is awesome, you know, because I'm not the head coach anymore, which I loved. And it just gave me a different perspective on the game. But what I became was the team psychologist.
Yep.
You know, and I ultimately put a seat next to me that when people came out of the bench, I could call them over to. And there was one young lady specifically, I nicknamed her Chicken Little. She was a phenomenal 3-point shooter, phenomenal, and a gutty defender, gutty competitor. But the moment she missed a 3-pointer, body language, like shoulders went down, head went down, and it was just this big psychological game. Like, I failed. Yeah. You know, so I'd pull her over and talk her off that cliff. Failed. You hit 5 out of 6 in the game. How's that failure? Right. You know, you're one of the best competitors in the team. Think next sequence. If I miss this 3, what do I need to do to go get the ball back, to give us another chance, whatever it is? And they just struggle with that, especially on the girls' side for some reason. The psychology around the sport is challenging.
Yeah. No, you're right. Because guys, most of them do have the mentality of, well, I'm hitting the next one. Girls many times have the mentality of, well, I missed, I'm done. That's it. Yeah. That's over. And there are times that, yeah, when I coach girls, there were times that was far more of a struggle from a confidence, you know, standpoint. And we kind of had to get with our kids where instead of focusing on the result, we didn't say it was successful whether or not it went in. What was the process? Was it an open shot? Was this a good shot? Did you go correct shooting mechanics? Was it on balance? All those things, and say, then it was successful. It didn't matter if it went in. And so many times when I look at these kids, whether or not they went to college or made it to the, you know, D1 level, no. What was the process? It's the same thing. How were your grades? How did you treat people around you? You know, what was your environment around you? How did you treat, you know, your parents and your family and your teammates? And so much more important than if you put the ball in the basket.
100%. And even more so much more important than winning. You know, I know we all want to win as a coach.
Yes.
But, you know, if you develop the right habits, if you work on the proper execution, if you imbue the right discipline to get better through failure, you will be far more successful than somebody who's just focused on winning. And you know, that's the message at every practice. It's the message in the game. And honestly, I coach now through my work. You know, the team that I have in my region, and that's the same message with them. We're going to fail at times. What do we learn from it? How do we build from it?
Yep. Yep. And such good points to make, because hey, failing's a part of life. We've all done it. If you haven't done it, it's just a matter of time.
Yeah.
What are you going to do when it happens? How are you going to respond when it happens? And I think we know as coaches, we learn so much more about you in adversity than we do when things are good.
Yeah.
I'm going to find out who you really are when you hit adversity. That's always a very interesting point. The book kind of hints at the role that school boards can have, educational systems, schools, whatever may have in these sports conflicts.
Yeah.
What are these schools getting right, if anything? What are they getting wrong?
I would say more and more in today's world, these schools or the administrations that I've dealt with tend to be very hypersensitive and hyper protective of themselves.
Yes.
And I want to repeat that, of themselves. In
right.
my opinion, you're hired, you're elected in a lot of cases as a school board to protect and preserve the sanctity of the school. And in that school are students who absolutely should be protected, right? That's our main reason. But there's also staff, and there's union staff and non-union staff. I was one of the non-union people, right? There's here in New Jersey, Schedule A, Schedule B. Schedule B are the coaches like me that were hired to do just basketball, didn't work in the school. And that's just as much a part of the school as anything else. But when it came down to it in this particular case at Homedale, that Board of Ed was only concerned about protecting themselves. How do we shield ourselves from any kind of litigation, from any kind of future problem, and did absolutely nothing to explore or investigate the truth in this. Nothing. Well, I mean, nothing.
And that is where it gets painful, because it no longer becomes about right and wrong. It becomes about what can we cover, what is going to look bad for us. And right and wrong has no place in, bizarrely, something that should be looked at as what's right and wrong. Yeah. No, they're completely
to that point. I'm sorry, Clint, I didn't mean to cut you off, but to that point, if you think about administrators, educators, school boards, their job, also part of their job, is to also educate and teach these kids on proper procedures, on how to handle situations. Instead, what they're doing is green lighting them to say anything and do anything. And we have you're going to be the one protected, regardless of due process, regardless of the truth. And that's just not reality.
No, it isn't. And, the worst thing about that is kids are going to learn or be taught. Whether or not you meant to teach them that, they're going to learn. They're going to learn from that. And so we are teaching them that. We sit there and say, well, no, that wasn't a lesson that no, you taught them something. It was something really bad, but you taught them something. Make no mistake about that. They absolutely took them a lesson that day, because when there are disputes, and I saw the exact same thing when I was coaching. I had a dispute between parents in the stands. Well, it came back to me. I'm not security. What do you want me to do? What am I supposed to go up in the middle of the game and separate two parents? But they didn't want to hear about that. They wanted to hear, well, you were in the gym. You should have handled it. I'm kind of busy. I kind of got my hands full. Again, why don't you go find out what's right and what's wrong and go from there? No. We want that off of our plate. We don't want it to reflect on us. And that was 100% what it was, which is just horrifying. Did you have any moments, and I would imagine that you had to, because I think back, if I were writing a book like this, there had to be some moments in writing it, in kind of coming up with it, that you were like, this is going to be tough. This is going to be a rough part to write.
Yeah, most definitely. There are good and bad emotions. And one of the things I tried to focus on was, listen, this was an extremely unfortunate story at the end of the day, what happened to me. But I don't want it to overshadow all the great experiences I had as a coach for 33 years.
Sure.
And I coached boys and girls at different times. So, what we were talking about before around confidence between boys and girls is 100% true.
Oh, yeah.
But I didn't want it to be just about the negative. I intertwined some of the real positive stories, and even some of the stories that may have started negatively, a parent misunderstanding, a miscommunication, whatever. But at the end of the day, we came to a point where, we respected and honored each other.
Right.
I bring up one example of a father who wanted to have me fired. I was a volunteer coach at a Catholic school for 7th and 8th grade boys. And he wanted to have me fired because I I was holding his son to an expectation that he would be at our basketball practices, no more so than anybody else. And if he was going to miss it for any kind of reason, like football season was ongoing, that all I was asking for was a communication to me so that I could plan appropriately.
Well, sure.
And it blew up like crazy, and he was F-bombing me left and right, over the phone. And again, he was going to fire me from a volunteer position. I was like, go ahead. But at the end of the day, I ended up coaching both of his sons. And he came to me after the second son and said, thank you for making my boys better men. And I was like, that right there is why I coached.
You're exactly right.
Yeah. So the moments like that were fun to remember. They even talking about it still kind of chokes me up a little bit. Certainly the moment around the Homedale, my last opportunity to coach, and how that unfolded, that was really difficult to get through, because it was something that just stuck with me for the 2 years afterwards, right before starting to write this book.
Sure.
There were moments of just absolute joy, just kind of going back over a story again and seeing the development of a young man or a young woman into who they are today, and knowing them as 40, 41-year-old, fathers and mothers today. And they still call me coach. So there's a lot of emotion behind this book.
Oh,
and it's my story, but I think there are lessons in here for everybody beyond basketball, beyond youth sports.
For sure.
And I kind of empower the reader to find those things, like, how would you apply this to your life as opposed to telling them?
Sure. No. And we say it every day, and I know it's cliche, and I know people get tired of hearing it because they want to many times put down what athletics brings. And, sometimes it has this bad connotation. It teaches life lessons if it's done the right way. It teaches things you're going to reflect back on even now, that you'll go, okay, what do I do in this situation? What do I do when I'm hit with adversity? What do I do when I'm dealing with someone I don't want to deal with? What did I learn? Sometimes back in 6th and 7th grade, you still apply those same principles today.
Yeah, but what ultimately are we teaching them? Because you said, what do I do when I'm dealing with a difficult person, right?
Right.
Now you have the portal in college that if I don't like my coach, I can move on.
See,
and that's in high school today as well.
Yes, it is. And I was actually involved here in the state of Colorado with I was at the school where the court case was opened, where you could open transfer for athletic purposes, because again, a player and a player's mom didn't like the way we were coaching. So purely for athletic purpose, they transferred. It all ended up going to trial. It all ended up going to court. The judge opened it up for about 2 or 3 years, and we just saw chaos in the state of Colorado in high school athletics. They had to close that off, because this is just, guys were transferring 2 and 3 times a season. Yeah. It was unreal. So yeah, you're exactly right. So many things. Wow, Darren, I could sit here and we could just talk basketball and coaching the rest of the night here. I've got to ask you this though.
Yeah.
You wrote this book. It talks about some difficult situations. It talks about some situations that sometimes as a country right now, it feels like we're failing in a lot of ways. But what are you hoping that parents or kids or coaches, even players, are going to read and get from your book?
Yeah, I appreciate that question, Clint. I've thought about that several times.
Yeah.
And I really want this to be maybe the opportunity for the person who's reading it, whatever they are, player, coach, teacher, parent, to just hold a mirror up to themselves for a second. Because I'm sure there's something in here where they say, oh, I kind of do that. Or it sounds a little bit like something I did. And if it helps them recognize it and helps them change that, if it helps a player go talk to a coach before they complain to mom and dad and try to have a crucial conversation around what do I need to do to get better, most coaches would embrace that kind of conversation, right? If it causes a parent to pause for a second and realize that they're not in the gym with their daughter or their son 2 to 3 hours a day, 7 days a week, trying to develop not only them as an individual, but them as part of a bigger picture of being that teammate and being a good teammate and where they fit into that, that maybe they don't have the right lens to judge through. And again, open up a dialogue with a coach. Most people, most coaches, as long as you're not complaining about playing time, if you're asking about what it is to really improve my daughter or son's position in the game that they love, most coaches will listen and talk through that. And then the administration, for God's sake, you are hired to do something. You are hired, and what you're hired to do is to lead. Don't run from it. Don't run from that challenge. Embrace that challenge. And my whole circumstance, in my opinion, instead of 40 days to find out what I did wrong or in their eyes what I did wrong, just to find out that I didn't do anything wrong, that could have been done in 40 minutes in a room at the school with the parties involved and somebody actually leading through the process instead of running from it.
Yeah. No, you're exactly right. Wow. There are so many things here. Like I said, I could sit here and talk to you forever. The book is called Out of Bounds. The author is Darren Ault, A-U-L-T. Darren, where can listeners find the book? Where can they follow you? Maybe is there, social media or any website or anything like that? Where can listeners go to view more? Because there's a lot more here. And I would encourage people to go pick up this book, because this is something that if you have a youngster in your life, you're a coach, you know someone who's playing, someone who's coaching, trust me, this is going to be something you're going to want to read. You're going to want them to read. This is really, really good information. And this is information from someone who actually gets it. Where can they find your work?
So I'm kind of all over the place. I am on LinkedIn for sure. Instagram at Coach 88, Coach Alt 88. Sorry. Same on X. I'm a little new to the social media aspect beyond LinkedIn, so I apologize for that. I am working on a website, do have one, and I will be posting it on my links there. My son and I actually do a podcast, not to steal away from you, but we have an outside the coach's box. It's on Spotify.
Okay.
So there's a lot of ways to engage with me. And listen, at the end of the day, I'm happy to talk to anybody about this, because I think this conversation is vital to changing the environment to more positive for our youth to grow and develop. So yeah, reach out to me any way you'd like to. I'm happy to discuss it. And please get the book.
Absolutely. Where can they find the book?
The book is through, the publisher was the Paper House. Ingram Spark is actually the printer, but it is available on Amazon and Barnes & Noble and pretty much any book outlet.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, that is perfect. Darren, I want to thank you so much for your time. I want to thank you so much for coming into the Daily Dose and talking a little bit about coaching, a little bit about the crazy relationships and some of the crazy stories. At some point, we may need to have you back and just hey, we'll just share coaching stories, because I'm sure you've got a million of them, and I would love to catch up. And if you have anything else coming out, feel free to reach out, because I would love to spend more time with you. But I want to thank you sincerely for coming on the Daily Dose. I really, really appreciate your time.
Yeah, Clint, thank you so much. I appreciate the platform, and I'd be happy to come back on. We can even talk a little Dallas Cowboys versus Denver Broncos whenever that happens.
We absolutely could do that. I would love that.
All right. Sounds good.